Very good. This is Rick Vest, and I will call to order the Railroad Transportation Safety District meeting for Monday, June 6th, 2022. This meeting of the City of Lincoln, Lancaster County Railroad Transportation Safety District, commonly referred to as the RTSD, is subject to and adheres to the Nebraska Open Meetings Act. A copy of the Open Meetings Act is available for inspection and is posted by the entrance to this room. The RTSD agenda and all the materials that are being considered at today's meeting were posted on the RTSD website on May 31st, 2022. The RTSD website is also accessible by links from both the City of Lincoln and Lancaster County's official government sites. In addition, on June 1st, the meeting agenda was posted on the bulletin board located in City Hall, first floor, 555 South 10th Street. A copy of the agenda is also available at the entrance to this room. One copy of the meeting agenda and all the materials being considered today are located at the dais, and complete copies of these materials are on file at the RTSD office at 949 West Bond Street, Suite 200. Mary, would you please call the roll today?
Edmondson?
Yes.
Bowers? Beckius?
Here.
Grable?
Here.
Short? And Best.
Present. All right, the next item number 3, is approval of minutes.
I move approval of the minutes.
Second.
We have a motion by Raybold and a second by Beckius to approve the minutes. Please call the roll.
Edmondson?
Yes.
Bowers? Beckius?
Yes.
Grable?
Yes.
And Best.
Yes. All right, item number 4, election of officers, president, vice president, and secretary.
I would move that we keep the present officers in place until the beginning of the next year.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to re-elect the officers for another year. Please call.
Beckius?
Yes.
Grable?
Yes.
Short?
Yes.
Yes?
Edmondson?
Yes.
All right, motion carries 5-0. Item number 5, reportment of statement of financial activity. Mr. Brody.
It doesn't matter. Use whatever you want.
All right. All right. Good morning, RTSD Board. Ron Rohde from Lancaster County Budget Fiscal Office, presenting the quarterly financials for RTSD. And when we put these numbers together, it was May 20th, 2022, because we thought the original meeting was June 6th, but we had a hiatus in there, so we're at June 20th or May 20th, 2022. We are 88% of the year complete. So keep that in mind as we go through these numbers. And again, it's broken up into 3 sections. So we have the first section was receipts, the second section is disbursements, and then the third is cash and disbursements. So first section is receipts, and again, these are as of May 20th, 2022. Tax receipts were $6,020,000 on a budget of $5,986,250, so we're at 99% collected at that point. We're ahead of schedule as of May 20th. Project cost reimbursement and miscellaneous reimbursements, we were 22, no budget there at that time, but we had an influx of cash for the Lincoln on the Move, which was the sales tax receipts of $227,472. So that represents 100%. Investment interest income, I think there's some that needs to be posted yet. That will come from the treasurer. We're at $40,243 on a budget of $80,000, so we're about 50% there. I think we'll see some more of that get posted. They receive it from the bank, and then it's posted via journal entry before year end by the treasurer. Overall, for total receipts, we're at $6.1 million on a budget of $6,253,965. Excuse me, that was actuals of $6,253,000 on a budget of $6.1 million. So we're at 103% of receipts collected as of May 20th. So that's a good scenario. The second item, the second section is disbursements. Commissions, refunds to state of Nebraska, $109,289 actual on a budget of $116,000 or 94%. Operating costs, we're at $79,229 at a budget of $104,900 or 76%. Construction costs, we're at $485,892 on a budget of $1.6 million, so 30%. Overall in disbursements, we were at $674,409 at a budget of $1.8 million or 37%. The third and final section are cash and investments. The main items to point out there are the items in bold. Ending cash balance at May 20th was $2,829,948. And then the second item is the ending investment balance of $16,865,318. The $2,800,000 is usually an amount that's higher than what we'd like to keep as far as cash for items that are coming due. And I just pulled the information last week. We're actually at about $700,000. So the treasurer, Roger and the treasurer are good stewards of the money. They've moved some of those monies over to CDs and money markets. So we're at about $700,000 there actually. So versus the $2.8 million. And then, of course, in the bottom section, way at the bottom, is just the mix of money market or the CDs, certificate of deposits, and the money markets. So, and it shows the maturation date and then the percentage that we're receiving on that, which we should. I'm guessing that with the recent interest rates changes, we'll probably see that increase, with recent events. So keep that in mind, and Roger and I will budget accordingly. So that's it for the RTSD financials. Any questions?
Well, first off, let me just say the 103% is really good news, Ron. I don't know why Dennis never gives us good news like that.
I know it. I get the good news.
That's a positive. So the disbursements are much lower than we anticipated, and maybe this is a Roger question, but what were we budgeting for that we had? It's in the construction project costs there, where it seems to be the biggest difference in the two.
We had $1 million budgeted for 33rd and Cornhusker, and as Ron said, through May 20th, we'd only paid out about 400 of that. That's the only big construction project. So but we'll make a couple more payments on that yet before the end of the year.
Okay. So, yeah. So that's all about based on the challenges we've had on moving the needle forward. We've talked
Yes.
about at previous meetings.
Yes.
Likely to see increased activity on that project. Any other questions for Ron about this report?
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would,
Need a motion to approve.
yeah, I would ask.
Moved.
Second?
We have a motion by Shore, second by Beckius to approve. Please call the roll.
Beckius,
Yes.
Grable,
Yes.
Shore,
Yes.
Best,
Yes.
Edmondson,
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0 to accept the statement of financial activity. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ron.
Item number 6, report regarding current budget status. Roger?
Okay, if the board will allow, like we've done in the past, the attachment forms for the current budget and the proposed budget are on the same form sheet, and I'll just kind of go through both items 6 and 7. Don't need any action on item 6, but we will need action on number 7. So the attachment and the proposed budget that's before you is very, very similar to what you saw in March. There is a $2,000 increase in the support services, the labor services. Increased the superintendent services $5,000, reduced the support services by $3,000, and then legal $10,000. We kept a number of those things the same. There was a slight increase in the accounting and auditing services. It went up $525, and that is to cover the contract that you approved in March for our auditing and budgeting firm. Commissions, we estimated again at 116. So the total operating expenses, we were right on track. We've done a good job in there. And this budget would propose just a little over $2,000 increase in the operating expenses. And if you move down to the construction projects, we haven't had a lot of activity in the crossing area as far as expending money. But it did budget, proposed to, in the 23 budget, again, $300,000 total for total railroad crossings, $250 in the city and $50 in the county. Going on down to construction projects, the other major change is about halfway down through there, the Salt Creek Railroad underpass west of J. We had a budget of $122,155. The NRD did complete that project and they invoiced the RTSD, so we've paid that money out, even though that didn't show on Ron's account because that occurred after that May 20th cutoff date. So I removed that from next year's budget. In listening to board member Ray Bolt, she voiced some questions and concerns about providing some contingency money for Southeast Quiet Zone if we needed that. There will be a report on the Southeast Quiet Zone and where we are and the time frame on that. In conferring with the consultant, if the board chose to move ahead with a preliminary design or a design of a quiet zone, I estimated with them that that could be in the range of $200,000 just for the design. So what I did is in the first two construction projects, miscellaneous engineering, I increased by $200,000 from $100,000 to $300,000. Excuse me. And then just as a factor of safety under the emergency and safety, which typically we budget $100,000, I increased that to $200,000. So there is an additional $300,000 in the budget that could be used for that kind of activity. And again, FHU will kind of give us an update on the schedule and when that conversation might occur. The only other project activity in the CIP is the continuation of 33rd and Cornhusker, and Chris Humphrey is here and she'll give us an update on the status of that project. Proposing to budget $600,000, and that's based on what we think the cash flow will be. Really trying to just budget the money that gets paid out in that fiscal year and not tie up money that we don't need. And that's the estimate in this upcoming year and kind of finishing that NEPA document. So
That number will go up significantly as we get to construction. But
Yes.
for now,
yeah. So the last year's budget was $1,843,055. I'm proposing a budget this upcoming year of $1,624,225. So just a couple $100,000 less than the year before. There's lots of flexibility in there, and then attached to the bottom of that again is the CIP sheet that shows 33rd and Cornhusker, and it shows, as Rick said, some pretty big numbers out there in those out years. So, and that's just the RTSD share in that cost. So I would answer any questions that you might have about the existing current budget or the proposed budget for FY23, which would be July 1 of 22 through June 30 of 23.
any questions? Jay?
Roger, could you tell us a little bit about the property tax rate that would correspond to this budget?
There is an item on the agenda, item number 8, where the board needs to request a levy request from the county board. With a little bit of a delay on moving ahead with the environmental document in this last year, I'm comfortable that if we maintain the levy this year, for next year the same, that we'll continue to build cash towards that project, and then next year we have an environmental document, we'll be in a better position to lay out construction schedule and those costs and talk about whether or not the board should request a reduction or an increase in that levy. My understanding in conversations with the board, there seemed to be a sense of let's maintain status quo, but you will vote on that here in a little bit. So
Okay.
that current levy easily supports this budget. In fact, our cash balance will continue to grow as we need it to for 33rd and Cornhusker.
Okay, thank you.
Good question, Jane. I only have one, Roger, and it's not directly related. If we came to a point where we wanted to amend the budget, am I safe to say there is a process for amending the budget midway through if we discover some needs for other projects?
Yes. And our accountant indicated to us the actual budget goes to the state auditor, has a significant capital budget and resources above this, such that you wouldn't probably even have to change the levy. You simply could change the budget and increase the expenditure, and there is cash balance for that to come out of.
That clarifies what I was asking. All
Okay.
right. Is that then 7 or is that set?
Item 7,
So we need to go ahead and move approval of the 2022-23 budget.
Second?
Okay. And we have a motion by Beckius and a second by Shore to approve the 22-23 budget. Please call the roll.
Raybold?
Yes.
Shore?
Yes.
West?
Yes.
Anderson?
Yes.
And Beckius?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0. All right. Then are we on to item 8, Roger? Is that correct?
yes, we need a motion. As everybody is reminded, the actual levy authority for the RTSD comes from Lancaster County Commissioners, and as such, we need to make a formal request of the levy of them, and based on what the board's desire and a vote, then I would prepare a letter to the Lancaster Commissioners requesting that levy.
And that's request is to maintain it at the current rate.
If the board currently wants to do that, yes, that's
That's our
point
decision. That's before us.
2.2217 is the current.
2217.
Yes.
I will move that we request a levy rate of 2.2217 for the upcoming fiscal year.
Second.
Have a motion and a second to request, to make a levy request of 2.2217. Motion by Shore, second by Rabel.
Discussion before you vote, just editorial comment. Those are in cents, and when the minutes come out, I'm sure our legal representative will have us change that to dollars per $100. So don't be surprised when that decimal moves over, okay?
All right. As long as it moves in the right direction. Please call the roll.
Yes.
Beth?
Yes.
Anderson?
Yes.
Beckius?
Yes.
And Raybold?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0 for the levy request. Item number 9, consideration of additional 1% lid authority.
Okay, just a quick reminder for folks that are out there listening. In 1989, the legislature passed LB 989, which placed a lid on a number of restricted funds of government entities. There are provisions within that law that allow an increase of the budget by 1% if approved by 3/4, a supermajority of the vote of the governing body. And a reminder out there, it's really an insurance policy. In the future, should the board need that additional budget authority, this approval, should the board choose to do that, does not increase the budget at this point. It only makes the provision for that budget authority to be available in the future, such as the board would meet again and vote on that. So again, my recommendation is to approve that additional 1%. It's been pretty consistent, city, county, and the RT has been doing that for quite some time.
So move.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Admonson, second by Raybold to add 1% lid to the lid authority. Please call the roll. Yes.
Anderson?
Yes.
Beckius?
Yes.
Raybold?
Yes.
And Shore?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0. Item number 10, consideration of Old Cheney BNSF sidewalk interlocal.
Okay. This is really old business, but interlocal agreements expire after a year, and the city is about ready to move ahead with the sidewalk continuation from Hunts Drive over to Wilderness Park Trail, and the railroad is prepared to do that too. So this is a bringing back to you an authorization for that interlocal agreement for the RTSD to pay for the work that the railroad does on their right-of-way, putting in the panels, and also the sidewalk and paving required on the railroad right-of-way. The city would be paying for the grading and the sidewalk necessary to get up to the railroad right-of-way. This has been a long time coming. I'm excited the city has that. I want to make sure, like all things in the last couple of years, prices have gone up. The original proposal for the project, the estimated cost was about $110,000. The bid prices and the numbers that we got from the contractor and the railroad, that's gone up to just a little under $170,000. So in this interlocal agreement, I'm proposing that the RTSD's funding would go up from $60,000 to $90,000. The city's goes up from $50,000 to over $76,000. So both sharing in the increased cost, money coming from LTU transportation and also from Complete Streets on the city side. Strongly recommend, even though the prices have gone up, that we approve that. The city can get that construction done and then bill us for that money. And I'd answer any questions.
I know Jane has probably done that little segment on your bike. I've done it in my tennis shoes. It is definitely needed.
Rough.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion by Admonson, second by Raybold to approve the BNSF sidewalk interlocal. Please call the roll.
Adamson?
Yes.
Beckius?
Yes.
Raybold?
Yes.
Shore?
Yes.
And Gus?
Yes. I would just say that projects like this, because of the work the RTSD does to pull the parties together and make sure the funding's adequate, they get done a lot quicker and a lot smoother than if people were fighting it out on who's doing what, where, and when. It's a little bit easy to overlook sometimes the benefit that the RTSD does on these kind of projects. Motion carries 5-0. Number 11, consideration of annual interlocal agreement miscellaneous crossing projects. We're getting Bill up now.
Good morning, Bill Cudel at Crosby Gunzel Law Firm. Appreciate the opportunity to be here before you today. This item is another interlocal agreement, and very much as President Bester was indicating, kind of the seamless efforts that the RTSD attempts to make with respect to crossing improvements. This is in that vein. It is a proposed master agreement between the RTSD and the city to streamline the process by which the RTSD provides funding to and reimbursement to the city for crossing improvements. As part of your budget, as you just approved the preliminary budget, I think there were $50,000 of funds budgeted for county crossing improvements and $250,000 within the city. Those funds typically have been used over the years for crossing improvements. Obviously, with interlocal agreements prepared on a piecemeal basis, this is an effort to try to have a master agreement for those crossings. The city of Lincoln enters into agreements with the railroads directly with respect to crossing improvements. This is a side agreement between the city and RTSD to reimburse the city or the county for those particular crossing improvements. If this is approved, we would, I presume, Roger, continue on with a master agreement potentially with the county as well with respect to county crossing improvements. It has a 60-day termination window. It provides some safeguards to the RTSD that the proposed agreement between the city and the railroad needs to first be provided to our executive director for review and approval and meet certain requirements. Certainly the cumulative effect of these types of agreements that we're committed to cannot exceed the budget authority that you've established here, but up to that point. And again, if there's a particular crossing project that the executive director isn't comfortable with, we don't have to approve it. We're not tied into that. It's very much putting the authority in our executive director to provide an effort here to reimburse the city without having to come to the board each and every time. Any questions with respect to that?
Anyone?
Maybe the only other thing is the city attorney's office and the city engineer's office have reviewed this draft. It would be going on to the city council for approval. They have agreed with the concept that's in there. So, and if approved, this would be the kind of agreement we could use to go ahead and remove those 3 crossings and 4 sets of tracks on Northwest 12th out by the airport. The city's currently working on an agreement with the railroad to remove those crossings, and then this agreement would allow that. Much easier because we only meet 4 times a year. The city council meets monthly. This master agreement gives us quite a bit more flexibility.
Yeah, no, I like the protections that are built in, Bill, that you know, that we have the right to say no, and it only goes to our budgeted level. So there is protection for the RTSD. Quite honestly, I can't think of any better place to put the authority than in the executive director of the RTSD. So,
As with other agreements, anytime one of those is approved, we would bring that and inform the board at the next meeting so that you have a good handle on transparency of what we're doing. And if, as always, if there's any doubt in my mind, I will touch base with the president and vice president of the board before I would move ahead if I'm uncertain, as well as with our attorney.
I would entertain a motion.
Move approval?
Second?
We have a motion by Edmondson, second by Beckius.
One comment.
Sure.
You mentioned that we'd be proceeding on a similar agreement with the county, so we'll probably see that at the next board meeting.
If the county's interested, county engineer's office is interested, yes. I've mentioned this, but I haven't gotten the paperwork over there, and they likewise, I assume, would have to run it through the county attorney's office. I'll make that a to-do for the December meeting, or no, September meeting. We'll see. Maybe we can have that ready for September.
Good question. Okay, we have the motion and second. Please call the roll.
Beckius,
Yes.
Rabel,
Yes.
Short,
Yes.
Yes.
Edmondson,
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0 to approve the interlocal agreement. Item number 12.
Okay, report and update on projects and crossing updates. The first item on there is 33rd and Cornhusker, and Chris Humphrey, our project manager, who is back as the project delivering design assistant city engineer and manager.
Welcome back.
Yes, thank you.
Floor is yours.
So, good morning, Chris Humphrey. I'm the 33rd and Cornhusker project manager, and like you mentioned, we are still slowly moving the needle forward on the project. We are in kind of the last phases of developing the draft environmental document. This is an EA, environmental assessment. And I know some of you weren't around when we did the Pell study, so just to kind of give you an idea of this document that I keep on talking about, the Pell study, with all printed out, was about this thick with all of the amendments and appendixes. And so this is a pretty substantial document that we're working on. So there's a lot of people that are involved with the review. There's about a handful of 5 different environmental items that we're working on wrapping up the documentation for. The item that is the most challenging right now is the parkland, and there's one specific type of parkland that was paid for with federal funds, so we are working through that right now. That will probably be the final thing that before we are able to submit the draft environmental document first to the state for review, and then it'll go to FHWA for review. But we're still planning on holding a public hearing next, probably late spring or in summer. And then it'll take about 9 months after that to wrap up and have an official decision document based on that. And then we will move into final design, right-of-way acquisition, and construction. So at the same time, we are still coordinating with the Corps of Engineers on the Dead Man's Run project. They will be having design of most of their features completed by the end of this year. So we will be starting discussions with them in maybe 3 to 4 months about overlapping right-of-way. So there could be a potential for shared resources there. Again, we'd have to go back and on the 33rd and Cornhusker project and coordinate with NDOT and FHWA if we were to acquire right-of-way earlier, if it's needed for the transportation project, if it makes sense to acquire it at the same time as the core project. So we'll be having those discussions as well.
Very good. I heard construction.
Yes. Does anybody have any questions?
For Chris. Thank you, Chris.
Just one question, and maybe I'm remembering this incorrectly. The FHWA representative, Melissa, that has been on our project has been reassigned, or?
She was just taking a temporary assignment for this summer, helping with a lot of the grants that are going on right now. She was helping, I think, write some of that grant language. So it was just a temporary assignment for 4 or 5 months, is my understanding. But she's still she still has a foot in the door with this project, so she's aware of what's going on. And FHWA had brought in some assistance while she was being reassigned to the Nebraska office.
Okay.
So it shouldn't delay the progress on our
It should not, no.
Very good. Thank you, Chris.
Okay, thanks.
Item B, Southeast Lincoln Quiet Zone.
Yeah, Mark Messenger of our consultant FHU is here to give us an update on the status of that project. So, Mark, the floor is yours.
Hello, board members. Mark Meisinger, Phillipsburg, Holton, Olivik. As Roger mentioned, we've made some progress on the project. We had what's called a diagnostic review meeting May 10th and 11th of this year. That included representatives from the city of Lincoln, Lancaster County, Roger with RTSD, Nebraska Department of Transportation, and then the railroads of BNSF and OPPD and their representatives. Just in general, we kind of confirmed the improvements that we'd like to make these, or propose improvements for quiet zone compliance. If you remember at Calvert Street, which is the northernmost crossing, we were proposing that to be privatized. We met with AGP out in the field with those same representatives, and they identified that they'd like that crossing to be removed from the quiet zone. And AGP would like to install active warning devices. And so we would remove that crossing from the quiet zone, but have probably a separate project to pursue some active warning devices there with BNSF and RTSD. They would still like to sound the train horns there at that crossing because of the nature of their operations with the grain facility, and there's some limited sight distance and things there, so they'd like to get some. When I say active warning devices, something besides just a crossbuck, which is what they have today. So gates, lights, and bells is what they would like.
Is that something AGT, because it is on private property, they would be responsible for paying for? Or?
Well, that's probably up to negotiations between BNSF and AGP. I believe that, and maybe Roger can speak to this, but I think that the RTSD may have some participation in something like that, but not 100%.
Part of the future discussion, certainly, if the crossing today, that's still Calvert right-of-way that butts up against Highway 2. So NDOT has some input in that, as well as the city. The city is supporting privatizing it. In negotiations, I suppose, should that move ahead, perhaps the RTSD could contribute some money to help put in the gates and lights and bells, as an incentive for AGP to privatize or to take over the ownership of that right-of-way. But none of that has been discussed very far at this point. So more to come on that. The railroad typically would say they don't contribute to a quiet zone. They might contribute to gates and lights if their horns still sound at AGP. So
Well, isn't-
more to come.
Isn't it typical that the government agency pays for the construction and then BNSF takes over the maintenance after it's installed?
That's been typical, but there are continued discussions where the railroads want the local road authorities to take on more ownership of O&M costs. We went to a conference last week where that was discussed at length, but we're not at that point, and certainly, I would encourage the city and the county and the RTSD to continue to not support that if we're helping to pay for construction and putting in the safety measures, and then still have the railroad be responsible for their equipment and the road authority for theirs. But not there yet.
I believe as a private crossing that AGP might take some of the O&M responsibilities at that particular location.
The railroad typically would expect in a private crossing agreement for the landowner or property owner to do the O&M on that equipment. So we may or may not get there. We'll see.
Okay. So then other than that crossing, there were 13 others, 2 of which are also private crossings, one at Nebco and the other at 33rd. And just in general, there's 2 railroads, so the BNSF line is kind of the northern or the westernmost, and OPPD is the ones farther to the south, starting at 56 and Old Cheney to the south and east. BNSF identified some, what they were calling obsolete equipment out in the field. So their gates and systems, in some cases, they felt needed to be upgraded. There was also a few locations where there's preemption with the City of Lincoln traffic signal system, and the preemption style is an older version of preemption, and so the diagnostic team identified that we should do a preemption study out there to see if.
Could you just explain preemption a little bit?
Sure. So I'll just say, for example, the Pioneers Boulevard crossing traffic signal is about 100 or 120 feet from the railroad crossing, and when the traffic signal at the intersection and the railroad crossing signal are in that close a proximity, they want them to talk to each other, to be able to coordinate with each other. So if I come through and there's a train coming through and it makes the gates come down, and the traffic signal goes through a cycle that it ends up being red so that nobody can go across the crossing. And there's a different kind of preemption that is a more modern style that they would like to implement there. I think there were 4 crossings that had that. That's just an example. And the idea with that is it's a safety measure, not to get people stuck between the traffic signal and the railroad crossing.
Thank you.
So there's some of that. There's some circuitry that needs to be upgraded. And then on the OPPD line, generally those are improved except for 56 and Old Cheney and 70th Street. 56 and Old Cheney, there's some, the railroad crossing goes through the middle of the intersection at a diagonal. So there's some improvements that they like to do there to, bring some of the stop bars back and make it a little more pedestrian friendly, because the pedestrian and traffic signal operations are kind of set up just for the intersection, and they're not really set up optimally for the railroad crossing. So there's just some minor improvements to do there that were identified, and then a major widening project at 70th Street to install a raised median. Also, a wayside horn was identified at 48th Street, and that's what we had before, but that hasn't changed. And then a widening of Southwood there by the pickleball courts, Mr. Vest, that you frequent, is my understanding.
They want the widening of the street? Is
On
that-
Southwood, we would widen
Or the
to
crossing?
the east. It would allow us to put in a raised median. The existing street width isn't wide enough to put a 4-foot median in there and still keep the existing curb line. So we had proposed widening that to the east. And so the process is that that group got together and we have meeting minutes that need to be approved. And so we have a draft set of minutes that Roger has reviewed and the city is in process of reviewing. Those should be done here at the end of this week with review, and then we would send those back to this diagnostic team for their review and approval, and that includes the railroads in FRA, Federal Railroad Administration. So probably from today, probably 4 to 6 months before we would get all the way through that review process. And as part of that, that becomes part of the official record of safety improvements that are proposed by the diagnostic team. And that's what would need to be installed if a quiet zone was to be moved forward with.
Will we have the opportunity to review those minutes in detail, or we'll
Yeah.
store our agenda at the next board meeting? I think you
Yes.
provide a lot of information. I'd like to be able to
Sure.
see it.
Yeah, the only reason we didn't do it, the only reason we didn't do it here is because they're not quite done yet.
Right.
But yeah, if the next meeting is in September, we can provide that, and we'll have a report. We have a draft report prepared now, but it needs to be updated a bit with the results of that meeting. So, yeah, we can have all that by this September.
That would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay. I can answer any other questions if you have any.
Okay, no, yep.
I think you have
I'm sorry,
another-
Jane, yes.
Just to go over again, so you submit the meeting minutes of what all the stakeholders saw and agreed upon and brought to our attention.
Mhm.
So that's 4 to 6 months. So that won't be really at our September meeting, will it?
We will have the
minutes
that we're
compiled.
sending out.
Mhm.
The various agencies have some review periods that I would hopefully get back comments by September. But at a minimum, we can give you what we've presented to them.
And the comments typically are that they concur with what was discussed, and that seems the direction that needs to be taken at that specific crossing, or they can come back with other recommendations at that time.
Yeah, so there's basically what we heard in the field and what we talked about in our office with them,
Mhm.
and that's in a paper copy of a report style, like a memo. And then there's some conceptual drawings that will be included that show what the improvements will be. And so part of what the railroad will do is provide us some preliminary cost opinions on what these improvements might take. And so that's kind of the piece that primarily that they'll provide to us in that 4 to 6 month time frame. So they can review the minutes, and that's a fairly, it's maybe like a month. But to get the improvements, quantities, and cost estimates together is what takes the longer time. And we're kind of waiting on them because they're the ones that, they basically do the construction. So we have to get the cost opinions from them.
Did anything surprise you in your meeting with them of items that they focused on or brought up or asked more questions about than some of the other items?
I would say just that, you go out there and the line was activated with the warning devices, the gates, lights, and bells. And I guess my understanding and Roger's was that in many cases that what was out there was adequate. And particularly BNSF came with a lot of things I think they would desire to be in place that might not necessarily be required. I don't know,
Standard,
Roger,
yeah, standards have changed since that equipment, much of that equipment's been put in, so there are some newer requirements in the MUTCD. Just some simple things like now the MUTCD says that you need to have the flashing red lights over the top of each lane of traffic going through. That means building new masts and cantilevered structures, much like is out on Pine Lake Road and Yankee Hill Road that were done with the city projects. And as we've said before, the railroad will want, to upgrade to the extent that they can. So between the standard change and increased costs, perhaps, those certainly will drive up the proposed or the draft cost of a quiet zone over what we thought initially might be required. And then there may have to be some negotiation between ourselves. FRA is the final authority on whether or not what we're proposing meets the quiet zone, and the railroad would have to abide by that, but there may be some days, weeks, months of negotiation back and forth on what actually would need to be built. That needs to be in place before we could consider then moving ahead to an actual design, if the board was supportive of moving ahead, depending on the cost of that at this point.
Just one question, and maybe you don't want to get into too much detail this time. The one wayside horn at 48th, what was the logic of that as opposed to 13th or 27th or 56th or any of those other high traffic crossings?
So what we would like to put in there is raised medians, and you have to have a minimum of 60 feet between the gate arm and the end of the median nose. So 60 feet from where the gate comes down to the end of the median as you approach it. And in that location, there's only like 40 feet between the gate arm and the edge of Highway 2.
Okay, and that's not the case of those other
Yeah, the other ones are
crossings I
far
mentioned.
enough, so that,
All right.
that one's too close, and we can't make that.
Can't move the
distance.
railroad, we can't move the,
I mean, you could, but it would be cost prohibitive.
And that will take much longer,
Okay.
so.
Yeah. I should say also, and I don't know if the city has more information, but City of Lincoln was at the diagnostic meeting, and they do have some plans to do a study of Highway 2 in the future. And so with that and the preemption, as I talked about with the traffic signals, those projects would likely be coordinated. I don't know that we'd want to come in and just do the quiet zone without knowing what the city had planned to do on Highway 2. And that's a future project. That's not planned yet.
post South Beltway type.
Yeah, yes.
City and state's currently working, I believe, on a relinquishment agreement for that to be in place, but the coordination, just as Mark says, needs to be done. The board certainly can choose what they might want to do. I have not been an advocate of wayside horns, and city traffic engineering is not an advocate of wayside horns. There have just been some issues. Maybe there's newer equipment and technology that is more fail-safe. There's been more than several dozen incidences at 35th and Adams just over the last 2 months. And city traffic engineering is on top of that, and yet we are having failures and then fixes and then other failures, and sometimes it's been very difficult to figure out. And then just the coordination in operations between the horn starts sounding on the locomotives, and then to get the tickets cleared, it has been a challenge. So again, I would just say that's not my favorite.
Piece of equipment.
Yes.
More to follow on that. Any other questions for Mark?
No.
All right, very
Okay.
good.
Thank you.
Item C then.
Okay, consistent with past practice, the They're South Salt Creek, South Lincoln, and Lincoln Saltillo Road quiet zones. It's actually kind of all one. It's First and J, D Street, South Street, Park Boulevard, Pioneers, Old Cheney, South 14th, and then Saltillo. Those 3 quiet zones are all due for reevaluation and updating, which is required by FRA. And in the past, the RTSD has paid for that reevaluation using the small contract authority that the RTSD has, and using the consultant that created those 3 quiet zones. We've entered into a contract with FHU to do that. They've agreed to do that in a fairly short time frame. The contract amount was $21,750. That would be, they're going to have to do paperwork, 3 sets of paperwork, because there's 3 separate quiet zones, even though 2 of those only have 1 crossing each. The cost to do Hickman, which had 2 public crossings and 1 private crossing, was about $12,000, and this one has much more administration. I think that was a very reasonable amount. So just informing the board that that contract's been signed, and FHU was given notice to proceed a couple weeks ago, and they'll be working on that for the city. I will work with them. It will require the paperwork actually has to be signed by Lancaster County and the city of Lincoln to go to FRA. In affirming that, we're just acting as their agent to get that work done for them and keep those current. So don't need action on that, just informing you, and appreciate FHU's promptness in starting on that. Couple of other crossing reports. Union Pacific came in and replaced the crossing just south of I-80 on Northwest 12th that goes into the Casey's and the motel and LES out there. That was a tough challenge because that's the only access in and out of there. They did work with Casey's to find out when they closed on a Saturday night and started after midnight, I think, on a Saturday night, got some work done, then put down steel plates so people could get back and forth during the day. If you haven't driven that, that crossing is quite smooth and is working well. With you approving the master agreement, as I said, the city is still working on an agreement with Union Pacific Railroad to remove the 2 crossings on Northwest 12th and the 1 crossing on Kingbird Road north and east of the airport in there. That would involve removing 4 sets of tracks. Union Pacific is agreeing to pay for approximately 50% of that removal. The RTSD would pay for the cost to put the pavement back, or the other 50%. Currently, city engineering is working on a plan on how best to do that and coordinate that. So looking forward to getting that done. Let's see. I mentioned we've had issues at 35th and Adams. I want to commend LTU, Traffic Engineering and Operations, for diligently watching the cameras and being out there nights and weekends, working with the railroad to try to get that equipment working and then communicate back with the railroad, because we start getting calls pretty quickly when the locomotive horn sounds as well as the other.
It's worth noting that at that crossing, it's not 1.4 trains a day going through it. So there's,
It's just a reminder.
There
North
are
Lincoln
a-
versus South Lincoln is what you're saying.
there are a lot of horns being blown at 35th and Adams when this happens.
And then,
Commercial area, you know?
yes.
I think there are some folks that you might know would disagree with that.
Yes, I do know folks that would disagree.
The other crossing activity that's been going on, obviously, if you live in South Lincoln, 56th and Old Cheney intersection has been closed. The railroad, working with LTU, both engineering, construction, and watershed, had found some disrepair and some settlements underneath the paving. It affected both storm sewer paving as well as the actual tracks for OPPD. That repair is complete, and the concrete and the work is maturing over the weekend, even though we didn't see anybody out there, and should open very quickly. But I
think they
commend.
were removing cones as I drove down.
As I drove
this
down
one.
as well.
Yeah, they were.
Yeah.
I believe the note said open tomorrow, so today they're feeling good about being able to open that. So that's great. I just would commend the city of Lincoln and their promptness in getting in there. Their maintenance folks come in and did a lot of paving repair, fixing settlements. They were able to coordinate with OPPD so they could run the coal trains through when they needed to do that, and they did a good job, so they need commended for that. And with that, I don't have any other reports on crossings or anything. I'd answer any questions you might have. Anything?
Do we need a motion for item C? Did we do that?
No, that contract was signed. I'm simply reporting to you that the president and the executive director signed that under the small contract authority.
Good question, no, good clarification. All right, item 13, any correspondence or communications?
Didn't have any communication or correspondence significant enough to bring up. But before you go to item 14, our legal representative has another item to discuss with the board, if we could do that.
And this can be in conjunction with item 14, Roger.
Okay.
Non-agenda items. I just wanted to bring up, now that you've approved the preliminary budget and the levy request of the county, it's appropriate to have a separate public hearing on our budget. And as you start looking into September 6th as the next date, it's up to you when you want to do that. Roger and I were discussing maybe it's appropriate just to do it immediately prior to the next meeting. If you want to set it at 11 o'clock for the public hearing and 11:15 for the next regular meeting, maybe that's appropriate, but that's up to you.
Sounds appropriate to me.
Yeah, it makes good sense. Okay, yeah.
September
that-
All right,
let's
we
go
will
that way.
proceed that way. It'll be two separate meetings that day.
Perhaps just because we have the holiday immediately prior, we might do a head count to make sure that we have enough folks here. I anticipate I will be
I will
here.
be here. Mhm.
Okay.
That's a good idea. We'll want to touch base late in the week before, Tom, because sometimes people have schedules conflicts. So evidently the 6th is a Tuesday.
And President, I should also point out, we are going to have to publish notice for that 4 days in advance, so that's that date when we set the public hearing is going to probably need to stick. So we'll need a good number from you.
Okay, so we'll want it Wednesday before, Roger.
Yeah, we'll make sure and do that. That is the budget meeting is the one meeting that requires the formal publication of that budget in the newspaper to satisfy the state auditor's requirements and the statute requirements. So,
Very good.
under non-agenda items, I guess just very quickly, one other thing. I did attend the National Committee on Uniform Traffic Control Devices in Virginia 2 weeks ago, and the government continues to move slowly. That document, the 2009 document, is still waiting to be updated, but it is out for public comment. FHWA got 35,000 separate comments and inquiries that they have to respond to every one of those before they would actually publish a final rule. So we're already talking about maybe the manual. I believe with the new administration, they are requiring this manual to be updated every 4 years. We'll see if that happens. The challenge in some of that is many states then produce their own supplement, and they have 2 years to do that. So you'd update the manual every 4 years, and halfway in between you'd get an amendment, and then 2 years later ongoing. But I just wanted to thank the board for the support for that travel to be there and have the opportunity to do that. The other thing is last week, NDOT sponsored the 4-state Iowa, Missouri, Kansas, Nebraska Highway Rail Safety Conference here in Lincoln. And Chris Humphrey and I were able to attend that. And Chris made a presentation on our 33rd and Cornhusker project and where we were. And again, I made a quick presentation on the value and the importance of the RTSD and safety, and it fit very well. So appreciate the opportunity to do
Roger,
that.
just out of curiosity, how many folks did that bring to Lincoln and Lancaster County, that meeting of the 4-state consortium?
There was only about 120 registers
Okay.
It,
We'll take it.
Yep,
We'll take it.
We'll take that
Uh,
hotel.
yeah, I think next year it's intended to be in Iowa.
Okay.
So with COVID gone now, maybe they're slowly kind of getting back to that. But it was a good time to meet with peers. I was also able to spend time conversing with both the DOT and the railroads about my expectation of their contribution to 33rd and Cornhusker and working on those relationships as well. So
Very good. Thank you,
That's all
Roger.
I have.
Anyone else wishing to speak on non-agenda items at this time? Seeing none, I would appreciate a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
I have a motion by Shore, second by Raybold to adjourn. Please call the roll.
Raybold,
Yes.
Short,
Yes.
Best,
Yes.
Edmondson,
Yes.
and Beckwith.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
yes, I forgot, Mary, did you happen to bring